To the work culture debates. Today, we are here to talk about mergers and acquisitions. And specifically, as we are the work culture debates team, we are here to discuss the role that culture plays or should play before, during, and after throughout the entire process of a merger slash acquisition. So let's kick it off with some brief introductions. Britni, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Britni Eisenmann with Stokefire. I partner with mission-driven executives and the organizations that they lead when you are in a major change point. So maybe a new CEO, a market change, a merger acquisition. I help you align your values and your mission so that you have the structural integrity that it takes to bear the load to get where you are headed.
Hi, I'm Deborah, and I help small and medium businesses remove barriers related to culture, structure, and human resource management so that they can grow effectively.
And Shannel?
My name is Shannel Winslow. I work with organizations to move through change, and not just from a standpoint of going through change, but also anticipating change, looking at processes, people, and technology to make them look forward to all the great things that change can bring.
And I am David Shar, president of Illuminate PMC. I'm here for all of your leadership and culture training, speaking, consulting needs. Basically, we help organizations build sustainably passionate organizations while preventing burnout. So let's kick this off. Is that my job too, in this role, or is that Britni's job because she always has it all together?
Why don't you ask us our first question?
All right, let's kick it off here. All right, so if you are getting acquired, hi Joseph. If you are getting acquired, why keep working on your culture? What's the point if it's just going to change soon anyway as you get blended into the purchasing company? So this is a great question. The acquiring organization already knows that they want you. And you're going through all the talks and all of the due diligence. It's easy to lose track of that and not be working on your culture, maintaining or building your culture. Britni, why it seems wasteful to continue to work on your culture when you're about to disappear into the greater organization anyway?
Yeah, there are at least two concrete reasons to do this. First of all, is most mergers and acquisitions have a few waves of voluntary turnover, people leaving. Your first wave is going to be people that were kind of flight risk anyway, don't want to work with a different company, I'm out the door. If you maintain working on your culture, that means that your supervisors stay connected to their team. They can hear what's going on, whether that's positive or concerned. You can find out about snags that are happening, especially in that critical 2 months after the merger happens, when the acquired company starts complaining about whatever it is they're going to complain about. At that point, those supervisors are still going to be in place over the same teams. So both organizations will then have access to what's going on before it becomes a crisis. The second is that your culture likely has strengths that the company that's purchasing you doesn't have. And if you, A, don't know about them because you're not that in tune with your culture, or B, got lax and didn't keep pushing and helping that to grow and thrive, then it no longer is a strength. And so that's not something that you can bring to the table. At the moment of acquisition, we're not usually talking about culture, but before, you need to maintain it. And then afterwards, especially when the going starts getting tough, you start getting some friction and some snags. That's when everybody can bring strengths to the table and better meld.
So if your culture is not very similar to the other culture, the acquiring culture, should you still be doubling down? So I know that Britni talks a lot about values, works a lot around cultural values. What if there's separate values? Should you still be doubling down on your values, on your culture, if you're about to go into this very different environment? Who wants to take this one?
Well, I think that One of the things I will say is that as a leader, your job is to lead your team through all of the ups and the downs. So when we're talking about two totally different cultures, your culture is also, to Brittany's point, a strength of the organization and something that is an intangible asset to the organization. And so when you are thinking about your values, regardless of whether they are similar or different to the organization that is acquiring you, you need to make sure that that is something that you are championing at that table, you are speaking on, and you are continuing to have it feed as you have been throughout the entire process. It is, you can have two totally different cultures that come together, but then once that acquisition or post acquisition integration work is being done, now we're talking about how do we meld those two together, and how do we take some of those values that we are have been doing and are our strengths, and melding it with the acquiring organization to meet in the middle. Because if you're doing a merger and acquisition, it's not just I'm going to eat all the things and I'm going to take over this whole entire company. There is a piece of culture that needs to continue to exist, and you need to continue strengthening it as a leader of the organization that's being acquired.
Yeah, and sometimes, a lot of times we think of the acquiring organization wanting or the aim to be this assimilation, where we bring in this other culture and we completely, like envelop them and assimilate them into our culture. But a lot of times that's not necessarily the goal, especially when the acquired organization and the acquiring organization both have strong cultures, which might be a little bit different. I think of Amazon and Zappos. When Amazon purchased Zappos, the idea was for Zappos to be very separate and to maintain their culture. And so, and I think they did a fairly good job with that. But imagine if, as they were getting close to the finish line, Zappos just gave up, and they're like, yeah, we don't really care. And they lost their best people, and they, lost their magic.
Right.
By the time Amazon owned them, they'd be worthless, because Amazon can sell shoes also.
That's
I
right.
Yeah,
agree. I think that, oh, go ahead.
I think that there is a risk when you unlink values to things in the culture, like behaviors, actions, processes in the culture that are working really well. And if the acquiring company sees, oh, you have this award that everyone goes wild over, we should just adopt that thing because it's really positive, it'll work really well. And they don't see where the actual link to the values is, and that's why the award works really well. They can adopt it, and then it falls completely flat. So when you maintain your culture before, during, and after, until it's time to meld or as you're melding, then you can help maintain those links so that both companies understand why things work, and then they can adopt it appropriately to the new larger organization.
Yeah, but I think that also we need to be cognizant of time. And as the things that I've read a lot about and have studied about M&As is that there's such a short time when this is happening. So I just also want to encourage champions of culture before anything happens, right? Just because there are companies, there are startups that develop and that their whole goal is to get acquired, right? And so for
Mhm.
them, I would say just be prepared for that, right? Like align your values, especially, for example, things like resiliency, adaptability. Just adapt your culture to that future process that you want to happen, that's your goal, right? So I think the champions of culture need to be aware of this way before an acquisition is even on the table, or before even a merger is on the table, because I think that the culture needs to be done before, right? You need to be a champion of culture before. And so when that happens, it can be quick, and you can already articulate, as Britni says, to be able to champion for it during the process. Because what I see is that if there isn't a strong culture, or people are not aware of what the culture is before, then during, it's going to be a complete disaster, right? It's just going to just melt into the rest of the culture because we're not like strongly aware of it, and we can't articulate it in ways that we can share it with others, especially a company that's coming in for a merger or an acquisition.
Yeah.
Deborah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think you bring up such a great point. Is people when they're moving into this space of merger and acquisition, sometimes it's a gloom and doom, like you're being bought out because you've done something wrong or you're trying to be saved. But in actuality, there, to your point, there are a lot of companies out there that is like, please acquire me. Right. I wanted to do this for the next 3 to 4 years. I wanted to, create this product. I wanted to create this service. And I wanted it to be a situation that it was so great that we get bought out. And there's an element of transparency and working towards that and building a culture of people who can go out there and just understand that you are in here for the shares of stock. You are in here for the ability to merge with an existing entity, possibly move up, whatever the case may be. M&As are not a gloom and doom thing, but you have to prepare and set your company up and have a layer of transparency with the people that are coming on board, to be able to they know what to anticipate within that organization.
Right. And Deborah mentioned sort of the speed of these things. And, in many cases, it's very similar to when I'm flying with my children. Everything moves so slow and it's trying to get them until boarding starts. And then Addie's in the toilet and I'm trying to get everybody together and we're trying to run and it's panic mode. And I think a lot of that is because so much of it happens behind closed doors, out of necessity. And then when it's finally go time, now you're telling people and you're starting your messaging, and there's just this havoc, and then it moves really, really fast. So what does that look like? That communication plan, when do you start communicating this? Because personally, it's 2023. Like, I feel like if I'm in an organization and there's this very unknown, what's going to happen after this acquisition, maybe instead of this unknown merged organization, I want to hand select the next organization I work with.
David, I think to tie your point to actually what Deborah had just said, there is this, there's a word for it, I'm forgetting it now, but there's like a reverse relationship between the talking about culture and the loud voices and the people that are getting rewarded for the financial side of the actual merger. Mm-hmm. So that 4 to 6 weeks where the merger is actually happening, you have investment bankers that are pushing hard because they get a bonus and a trinket to show off to their friends when it lands. And during this time when there are all of these motivators to talk loudly about this is the best thing that has ever happened, we have to get this through and we have to get it through right now, at that period in time, talk about culture is nowhere. It's not in our plan to go forward. Blending our teams isn't in our plan yet to go forward for so many of these situations. But that is doubly important why before and after we're taking care of both of our cultures, because there's going to be, it'll feel like a desert for a while, whether the employees know the merger's happening yet or not. But during that time that the actual merger's happening, the culture stuff is generally very quiet.
That's right. I 100% agree with that. I think that I understand the need to be able to keep things close to the vest, right? When you're talking about, understanding accounting strategies and building out financial models and talking about valuation, right? Any little shift and change in the market could change that. And it could be detrimental for both sides. Completely get the financial, reasons behind wanting to ensure that information is on a need to know. Got that. Well, we also need to balance that with, again, I cannot stress the importance of transparency and trust in the organization, right? Like your organization, the people on the ground know something is happening. Just surprise. They know you hired very smart people for a reason. So if you're in a situation where, you are the company that is being acquired, or you are moving through and more so from an acquirement perspective. You are the company that's being acquired, right? You need to work with whoever it is, whether it's your internal communications person, whether it's consulting internal communication strategist, bringing in an IO psychologist, shameless plug, right? To help move you through this process. Because if you don't have someone on your team that is looking at it from a workplace perspective, you are failing. You're failing yourself and you're failing the people that work for you. And that's on both sides. That is the company that's being acquired, as well as the company that is doing the acquiring. Because the one that's actually acquiring the company, that they're bringing in a totally different capability, type of technology, and you're bringing this and digesting this and ingesting this into the organization, and you don't have a post acquisition integration plan, then that company that you just acquired, to your point, Britni, people are going to leave. Your high performers are going to leave because they're not going to know what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what their value is, right? So you have to keep that in mind on both sides of the table, because if not, then what are we doing this for?
Right, right. A lot of times, though, the leaders themselves completely burn out through the process. So first of all, it's really difficult. There's this entire additional workload, put on besides for running the organization.
Yes.
And then, why are you looking to be acquired? Oftentimes, like Shannel said, it's for good reasons, because you're successful, because this was always part of the plan. And other times it's because you're just ready to get out, or you just, I interviewed somebody on another live stream show that I have that he helps dentists sell their dental practices. And he said that one of the most frustrating and most frequent things he sees is that as the dentists finally are in the spot where people are looking, they just completely unplug. They're done. They're done. They just, psychologically, sometimes we see the finish line and we get that second wind. And other times we see the finish line and we're like, oh, shoot. But then what happens? Then literally these dentists start losing clients. Their patients, like, they're not seeing as many patients. They go see other patients. So then when you're running the numbers for the final time, just putting your stamp on the due diligence, the numbers don't line up. And then you've got a problem.
Well, and let's even go to a standpoint. I'm sorry, Deborah. Let's even go to the standpoint of larger organizations, right? Where there is a deal in place that if I acquire you, you have to stay on for a certain amount of time as a leader. And now you are not just the leader of the organization, you are put into maybe an S role, or even worse, a VP role. And you go from being the CEO of this company and all of your folks coming under to now kind of middle management, sometimes senior level management. And now what? Right? You have your whole organization coming to you for things. Hey, Bill. Hey, Sarah. Hey, this. But these leaders are put into spaces where they're no longer making the final decision. And now they are part of this acquired organization leadership structure. How do you continue to keep those types of leaders inspired? Right? Because they've done something well, right? You're keeping them on for these 2 years. How do you ensure that they're not cancers to an organization that you're trying to rebuild because you just went through this major change?
Right. And we have this question just came up. Oh, Deborah.
Oh no, I just wanted to say that, yeah, the best practice, I think, is to keep them on. But to Shannel's point, how do you keep them on is going to make everything change, rather, like, for good, or it could be really detrimental for the organization. But I do think that most leaders, and I'm just going to generalize here, most leaders of organizations being bought or being merged do want to stay on because they want the merger or the acquisition to be successful. So even if they're no longer the CEO, they are going to be, hopefully they're in places where they can actually impact decision making. But I do think that most of them will want to stay on, even if it's in a lesser role, right? Just to make sure that their people are being taken care of, that the product, the service stays with quality, and that the value that they bring to this new, bigger organization is still being seen as what it is, right? So I do think that a best practice is to keep them on. I just think that, like Shannel, you have to be wary of where you place them, for lack of a better word, where you place them and what decision making capabilities do they have in the process. Because I do think that even if it's an advisory role, their voice has to be has to be taken into account when making big decisions with this new company, and especially post integration.
Right. That's a great point. And from the acquirer's perspective, I don't know that I want that person staying on. If that's what they want to do, if they want to be an advocate for their old company that I just purchased, I want them to take marching orders and make everything that I say sound pretty to their culture, their group, and help out that way. Otherwise, too many cooks in the kitchen sometimes. We have this question right here. Sustaining active managers are good. What happens when the managers of the acquired company is in an all-out panic mode, causing distress and major uncertainty among the team? Anyone want to take that?
That's not great.
Can you keep it on again?
Yeah, I can bring it back up.
Okay, go ahead, Britni.
Yeah, I assume this means that one of a few things happened. Not great communication at the top levels of both organizations, or something went belly up in the actual moment of acquiring. But since we're already talking about the leaders and the positions that they're put in, like there's going to be some leaders that led their company to a certain point and got acquired. Now they want to go back to research and development because that's really where they shine and that's what they love. But if they're in panic mode, it's their responsibility as a leader to figure out internally what the heck is going on. Why do I feel this way? And they're probably sensing some kind of misalignment. And maybe that's appropriate to bring up to other people as well. But leaders should know that when they're hitting this moment and their gut is telling them something, it means you need to get curious and open. But pushing down panic is going to make everything a lot worse for everyone.
Yeah, agreed.
We have another question.
Follow-up question. I think my question is, can you put that back up on the thing? What happens with the manager?
I think 2 more queued up after this.
Is an all-out panic mode. So this is post. So this is post acquisition, right? And so what I would go back to is one, it happens. It's a thing that happens. It's a bake-in period from an organization. And so it's one, ensuring that people are understanding, depending on how many, employees were acquired, and what that leadership structure is again, having that post acquisition, integration planning, that talks about the structure of the organization, that talks about how the management team looks. It's almost like the onboarding deck, right? It's now, welcome to this new organization. We value you. We value you as a person. We value your opinion. Having a feedback mechanism to be able to bubble up some of those concerns. It is ensuring that people understand kind of what that hierarchy is from an authority perspective, what they're going to be working on. Talk to them about those open conversations about their pay, even if it's reiteration and nothing is actually changing, right? It's almost like, how do I not push down the panic, right? But hit it head on and anticipate it, because this is an area of change, right? And that is from a standpoint of having the CEO coming in, and if that actual if the acquired CEO is still there, having an understanding that they're coming together, having the conversation, having it be cordial enough to start having those joints to show a layer of what's it called, cohesion between the two. But this is all a part of communications. This is all a part of management. This is all a part of that plan that helps people feel like they are now a part of a team. And it's going to take some time, but it's anticipating the panic.
Right. And just like all change management initiatives, it's about communicating, it's about setting expectations, it's about making
Mm-hmm.
sure that you plan beforehand. And it's ironic as an adult with ADHD that I talk about planning in order to avoid panic. Instead, I don't plan and I don't panic, which is another alternative. But if you're going to panic, then plan beforehand. This should not come as a surprise. Sometimes, an organization is suddenly facing bankruptcy and they need to be bailed out immediately. And so, yeah, there's panic
Yes.
there.
Right.
But otherwise, there should be active due diligence and planning. And that planning should include understanding the culture, doing a full cultural analysis of both organizations, doing a full, Britni does values assessments for organizations, understanding who these organizations are and how they're going to integrate, or whether they are going to integrate. Maybe they're going to assimilate. They've got to figure this out beforehand. Do as much of that on the front end as you can.
And can I just, oh, sorry, Deborah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that this is a lot of work, and I do think that we need to assess capability and capacity at this point and bring in somebody else, right? Bring in somebody that is not within this organization that's going to have specific feelings about this, and build what some people call a steering committee, right? This is a process of change. Bring someone in or bring a team in to support everyone during this process, because everybody's going to be handling so much more than just this, right? You have to keep doing your job as you go through this process. You have to, as a manager, you have to keep supporting others, but who is supporting you, right? So I do think that in this process, especially like during and then post acquisition or post merger, creating a steering committee of people just dedicated to making sure that this process goes well can go a long way. Because what I said about capacity, it's a lot of work. That planning, not every organization has somebody that can um, plan and execute that part, right? So it's really important to make sure that we assess what are the strengths of the company. Especially, I'm just thinking of startups. Some of them are not that big. Some of them have not gone through this before. And so I think that having that outside perspective and that process of planning that is a little bit beside the whole organization, I think is really important and can really make sure that the post acquisition or post merger process goes smoother, because managers are going to need support. It's just going to happen. Like Shannel said, we're going to expect it, and we need to make sure that we have that support for whenever they need it, because again, it will happen.
And we've got a couple questions and comments on deck. Shannel, I saw you were about to say something. Do you want us to go to the next question, or you want to drop some fire first?
No fire drop really quickly before we go to the next session. I think that it's going to be, and maybe we can come back to it, it's going to be important for us to discuss that there is probably a level of layoffs that will take place as we merge or these companies become acquired, right? So we can't, we need to make sure that that's a part of the planning process. Ensure that you have, to Deborah's point, people that understand how to help managers through these difficult times. Because go back to our what was our first podcast, y'all, about layoffs, right? If you need some layoff tips, but don't merge or acquire, and then a year later, 6 months later, be like, yep, and now we're gonna lay off half the people that we acquired. It is going to kill the culture now, not just in the acquired company, but then the company that's doing the acquiring.
Right, which brings up this whole conversation about ethics and how to do this, because there are redundancies that you face. And with those redundancies, oftentimes you need everybody in order to get you through the process, but then they're redundant and somebody's got to leave. So there are more ethical ways to handle that than to pull somebody along and make them think that they're going to survive this. But we should probably come back to that. Adeline says, when it's the situation when your company sells a specific region, a divestiture, how involved should the current company be in handing that region off to a new company? Is there a grace period in which both companies should be working with the region to transition? It's a great question. Anybody want to tackle that?
Well, the natural motivation is going to be with the acquiring company to get in there as soon as they can, figure out what's going on, and bring it on board. I think it depends what the deal is. The divesting company may not have a lot of natural motivation to stay in there. So it's possible that the org that is purchasing it needs to create some motivation, at least with, a level of leadership. Yep.
Yeah.
Perks, money, all of that stuff. So that's what I would answer that question with.
And Joseph says people have to buy into the new culture to maintain alignment. And Zachary says, I love these strategy-based conversions because companies constantly are having them. Shannel has a wonderful point. You want to keep people on who buy into the new company mission. But at what point does the leader mentality change as their environment continues to change? And their role, correct?
Yes.
Anybody want to tackle that? What's up?
Zachary. Oh, yeah. This is it. It really depends on, to be honest with you, Britni, I think you hit the nail on the head, is the motivations of that potential leader. A lot of folks that lead startups or start startups enjoy startups. Right? They enjoy the art of building something out of nothing and seeing it grow and being able to say, yes, this is the my contribution, and I'm being paid for my contribution. Let me go do it again. Right? It's like a serial startup. But I think that when you are taking a leader that has this entrepreneurial mindset and you put them into this culture where they are boxed in and forced to follow a specific structure and hierarchy, when they are used to being a creative spirit and going out and doing it and failing and doing it all over again and succeeding and doing it all over again, over time, that could really be a hindrance to their own professional growth. And so, what you want to, as a leader, do is, one, ensure that they are brought into the folds, but understand at the top of the agreement, if they are to stay on, what they are looking to do, and reach an understanding. And I'm not talking about this, professional based, understanding that happens in front of all the people. It's that behind closed doors conversations with some of these leaders of the acquired company, and go, so look, you got to be on here for 2 years. Yeah, that's what it said. We got that. What are your goals and plans, and how can I help you achieve those goals and plans while you're here? And have almost some guiding principles or some rules of the road as you are in now, quote unquote, my house. Right? Like, what are some of those things that you can contribute? How can I support you? But at the same time, how can you support me? And what does that look like? And people don't want to, think of that these leaders have these types of conversations. But I tell my clients all the time, if you're not having those closed door conversations and having those backroom understandings, you're failing. Because if you have a leader out here that you have, where you have acquired their company, and you are not, you not have an agreement with them when y'all are sitting at almost the same table, you're not leading your team effectively. So, Zachary, I think you bring up a very, very solid point. You have to be able to get to a space with these acquired companies leadership to be able to say that me and this person, I may not be. We know that they're only going to be here for a short amount of time, but while they're here, we have an understanding on what they're going to accomplish and where they're trying to go.
And I think that also applies to this, because we're talking about the specific serial entrepreneur, right? That she, they might not feel comfortable in that box for a long time. And I get that. And I love the point that you're making, Shannel, about having these backdoor conversations about growth, about professional development, and where I want to go with my career. But I also think about the other leader, right? The other CEO or founder that started this company and will see it through no matter what. Right. And I also think that person could potentially grow through the ranks of the other organization, the merger organization or the acquiring organization, because they want to see this through, right? They're mission driven, and they know their capacity as a company or as a division at this point, right? Maybe they're a division now and not a company. But I do think that having these conversations is perfect also for this scenario, where you have this leader that is not going to just go away, right? That wants to stay, quote unquote, with the company, even if it's now something else, and just even climb through the ranks of this other organization. We also have to look at that option and have them just onboarded and made sure that that's a possibility too. I know that's not what usually happens, but I do think that depending on the leader and what their professional goals are, especially in relationship to the founding organization, that's going to change.
No, I get that. I think that to your point, Deborah, that actually goes hand in hand with the Pixar, Disney, Zappos, Amazon, right? When you're trying to maintain a company in a company, when you're trying to have an actual separate yet same organization, where it's not completely an emergence of all things. 100% can see what you're talking about.
Or like when Meta ate Instagram, or I think it was still Facebook when it bought Instagram, they tried to pull in the two top Instagram leaders, and those leaders attempted to stay, but they didn't stay for as long as what I assume was a contract with Facebook then. And Instagram's a ghost town. It's a terrible platform now. You know, I think that the goal had been to keep what it was. Oh,
I used to not be cool enough for Instagram. Maybe I'm cool enough for Instagram.
I still use Instagram.
Me too.
Yeah, hearing this, I think it's time for me to move to Instagram.
I do not want to be.
Next time I talk to my client, Britni, I'm gonna talk about eating. I'm like, y'all ate such and such. Like, I love it.
So one thing that I'm hearing everybody here talking about, and I really want to get into this, is once we merge, what's the plan for the two cultures? Because in the acculturation process model, I'm going to throw a model out there. There's this argument that there's 4 different ways for culture to go, and that's integration, right, where you're separate but also integrated, you're working together. Separation, where you look at like Zappos, Amazon, separation, right? 2 separate entities, separate branding, separate marketing, separate everything. Integration would be more like Bank of America and Merrill Lynch, for the most part, for a long time, where they were sort of 2 entities working together. Assimilation, where everybody's just, we'll keep with the metaphor, eaten by the larger organization. And marginalization, where people they don't believe in either culture, so they just, fall out. And so I want to get into this with you all if you're interested in taking the bait. But this comment came in: best advice for a new employee that walks into an acquisition unknowingly, ride or dive. If I'm understanding the question correctly, my thought here is it depends. What I would always advise against an individual employee is to give up all of their autonomy. When that happens, nothing good is going to come from that for you or for the organization. And so when you feel helpless because there is not enough communication, you have no idea what's what, you have no idea what role you play in this, or if you're going to have a role, then take the reins and find something for yourself, I believe. But which on the flip side of that is why it's so important for leaders to make sure that there's role clarity, that people understand what this new organization is going to look like, et cetera.
Yeah, go ahead, Deborah.
No, I was just gonna say that it also depends. Like if you're a new employee, like right, you're interviewing for this process of getting selected as a candidate for that position. I would say, how are people talking about it if they're talking about it? Because there are ways to know whether a company is going through an acquisition or not. Like if it's because you say unwilling, like unknowingly going through an acquisition, maybe it depends on which stage it is. But if they are going through the process, like they already like sold or they're already got like acquired, and they're going through the process of building this new team or bringing in different capabilities because of like the need of the company, I would say in that interviewing process, how did they talk about it? If they even addressed it. I think that's really important because if they did address it, how did they address it? And if they didn't, and you just got there day 2 and you're like, oh, surprise, we've been going through this integration process, that would be a red flag for me. So I just wanted to put that out there. If they did talk about it, depending on how they talked about it, you can make that informed decision. Maybe look online, see if there's anything there surrounding this process. But if they didn't talk about it and you're just a new employee, it's day 2 and you figure this out and you don't know what's going on, that would be a red flag for me.
Yeah. People talk also. If I see somebody has my job title in the other organization and they're really involved in this process, and I'm kind of in the dark, I'm leaving. Because I don't think there's going to be space there for me afterwards. You got to take a look at the other organization and figure those things out.
Yeah, and here's my thing, right? You got to know yourself. You got to know what you need in order to be successful in any organization, right? When I was coming through my career, like I used to be able to sit my boss down and go, I need you to protect my scope, run my cover, and give me the runway to do my job. Those were the 3 things I needed from my boss in order to be successful. Of course, going into a leadership role now, things have changed and those are different. But I knew that if I had those 3 things, right, that I could probably prosper in any type of organization. You have to know what works for you. And that's a lot of work that you have to do on your own, regardless of what type of organization you're going into. Then once you're able to understand that, then you need to pair that up with the type of organization that's going to help you be successful in the spaces that you've stated that you need from those types of organizations. The reason why I say that is because if you understand where you are and what you're doing, then coming into an organization that is being acquired or doing the acquiring is always opportunity. You just have to know where to look and who to talk to about it. If it's an organization that is being acquired, me being who I am, and I know that I need to talk to my leader, I need to start asking questions. Now, if they're unable to answer those types of questions, now, to Deborah's point, now I got a red flag because I know what I need in order to be successful in an organization. If it is the company that, if I'm working for a company that is being acquired, right now I'm trying to understand opportunities, right? So what are those opportunities out there that aligns with my skill sets or transferable skills that I may or may not have? Do I see a career progression in this organization? Because in a lot of cases, mergers or acquisitions could very well mean career opportunities that was not prevalent or present a year or 2 ago. And that could be a good thing for employees that are able to move through change and identify mentors, sponsors, and coaches that can help them in their career path. So I wouldn't say that an organization that's going through a merger or an acquisition is a red flag, on day 1, day 2, or day 3. Because the people, especially the ones that are being acquired, the organization that's being acquired, those leaders may not be your leaders tomorrow. And there may be opportunity in that space of when things are being acquired or merged.
Right. And you're a unique individual. That's why in the past I've interviewed you about entrepreneurship. A lot of people don't take the initiative like that. And think about an organization where, they are very risk averse and avoid uncertainty, and suddenly they're being acquired. Is anybody going to stick around? Because you can't do that with certainty, right? But Joseph asks, what's the best advice for a business owner that has a large group of employees that have a mismatch of personal values with the new merger cultural values? Should they expect them to leave, or is there hope for remaining their talent? Britni.
I got this
Yes,
one. This is mine. Can you leave it up, David? There was a lot of...
Yeah, but then we can't see you. Let me try to move him.
I'll be done.
Sorry.
Here you go.
Your turn to be covered up.
That's fine.
Just sit high in your chairs.
Yes. All right, first of all, you have to create clarity. Understand, a word over here doesn't necessarily mean the same thing when the word is over here. So you have to understand exactly what does this personal value mean when they say they have this value. What does that mean? Because it very well may match something that the new company has. They're just using different words to talk about it. So first create clarity. And then you need to understand you're not going to be changing anyone's values or beliefs. We can't do that. I mean, each of us, we evolve as we go through life, but you can't walk up to someone and change their values, especially in a work type situation. You're not going to just work on them for 6 months and get them to change. So if there's a true mismatch, often it is the most ethical and kind thing to let them move somewhere else.
That's right.
Because even if it's not toxic, even if everyone has positive intention, it's going to get gross if their personal values don't align with the new company's culture, mission, and values. Because you can't force that. You can't force them into that box. No one's going to be happy. And that will just boil over into really gross stuff. It'll start with their team and it'll get further and further.
And Joseph is tackling an individual, right? If their individual values don't align. With us so far, and also within so much of the research around this stuff, we talk about organizations as like the acquiring organization has their culture and the acquired organization has their culture. But in reality, that's not the way it works, is it? Like, how many organizations have just this organizational culture? In our pre-call, Deborah, you spoke about this, the dynamic of these subcultures within a culture. So are we talking about these things all wrong when we're talking about this culture and this culture have a mismatch or match well?
I love that question. And I also think about the iceberg, like culture as being an iceberg. And I know that we have the visible values that we say we have, but we also have the really like deep values that we don't necessarily talk about. And so when I read that question initially, I was like, you got to give it time too. So when we say that maybe you have a personal value of certainty, right? Personal value of certainty, and you're a team member, and then you're going into this organization that is all about flexibility, adaptability, figure it out kind of a vibe, right? But just you need to give it time too for that person with its need for certainty into this space, because there are things below what we say the values are, what we've articulated that the values are. Those are the assumptions that is not really talked about when we talk about culture. When I say culture, I really don't mean what values are on your wall, right? I mean what do you believe in when things get hard? How do you tackle communication when it's really hard to communicate with people around you? When things get hard, what really happens? Those assumptions really come up. So I think that the process of a merger or an acquisition is a great moment to get a better look at a culture. It doesn't matter what it says on the wall, what vision or mission an organization has. You need to give it time, because that person might have a personal value, again, about certainty, and this other organization is all about flexibility and change and adaptability. But once you're in there and you see how they act upon that, that can really change, and that could really pull that new employee in. New employee meaning the person that came from that other organization. So what I would say, like initially when I saw that question, I was like, give it time. You don't know how it's going to manifest, right? Because there are underlying things that we don't talk about or we're not cognizant of surrounding a culture. And so when time does pass, you're going to be able to see the manifestation of that culture in relation to that person that comes in. And that's when you can really start to see whether it's going to be a match or a mismatch. I wouldn't necessarily go, oh no, they have different values than you. You're just not going to be great in this organization. Go away. I don't necessarily think that's what's going to happen.
How do we, and this is everyone on the call. How do you, as a leader, understand or capture or assess culture? We've been talking a lot about culture, right? But we then are merging one culture, so we have to understand that culture. And then we're merging another culture, we have to understand that culture. And to Brittany's point, it is those subcultures underneath, right? That each team has. I don't care what team it is, that kind of bubble up. How, as a leader, do we then assess the culture? What are some tools and tips that we can use to assess the culture?
I think most culture assessments that are out there on the market right now fail because they're so shallow, because they are assessing the culture. But culture is an output. You have to assess the inputs.
But you have to assess. And I don't think that happens. I don't think that happens. And there are so many tools out there, even the imperfect ones. You know, it's like I often get in trouble when I attack things like, well, I'm not going to say the name, but certain personality assessments that have no scientific basis. But the caveat is,
we know you hate Myers-Briggs. Just say
I am an INFP right now. Hey. But the truth of the matter is that depending on what you're using it for, if you're using it for hiring, forget it. No, there's a lawsuit coming, and there should be. But if you're using these assessments, even if it's like which Disney princess quiz, like online quiz, like which Disney princess are you? Fine, let's do the Disney princess quiz to understand different dynamics and understand that we're different and how we can complement each other and interact well together. So even the imperfect tools, I think, are useful if they're used correctly. You know, I've said it on here before. One of my favorite quotes, E.B. Box, says, all models are wrong, some are useful, right? So use it and get what you can out of it. Of course, there are some incredibly good tools. Britni has one of them that she's developed or developing in the moment. And so those are going to be better. But I think the real sin is when we don't use any tools. And so we're just looking at the other organization and deciding, yeah, it seems like it doesn't. And really, at the end of the day, mergers and acquisitions are a financial strategy. And it's going to cost you a whole lot more if that culture doesn't fit and you try to make it fit. So really, it should be part of the decision process from the very beginning, whether it makes sense to partner with that organization. And if it does make sense to acquire them, then how do we acquire them? Maybe we acquire them and keep them as two separate entities. Maybe we acquire them and integrate. Maybe we assimilate. Those are decisions that can only be made when you understand who you are and who they are.
That's right.
One last thing, can I say? Okay, so I know we're running out of time, but I do want to say that culture assessments, yes, they're not perfect, but they give you a starting point in which to have these discussions that are normally not had. So what I mean by this is most culture assessments are an x-ray. Yeah, it's like an x-ray, a momentary x-ray of what's going on in a specific time point. It's not going to tell you the culture that was before, like yesterday. It's not going to tell you the culture is going to be tomorrow, because there are so many things that we cannot control about those two things. But most culture assessments tell you where we are today, and it gives people the language from which to really articulate things that are normally untangible, right? And so I think that's the most important part, giving both organizations, right, the acquiree and the acquiring organizations, a language that we can both talk about culture from, right? So that we can articulate certain things about our culture. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be quote unquote scientific, but it's going to be a starting point where we can actually sit in a table and actually talk about different aspects of our culture, because we have something to start with. And so I think that's my biggest thing when we are talking about culture, because it can be talked about in terms that are certain, and it can be talked about in a way that we can say, okay, this is what we have now, this is where we're heading towards, what can we do to get there? So talking about culture and language is just very important. Okay.
Yeah, and talking about it with everybody, not CEO to CEO.
Can we hot mic that?
Oh, yeah.
Like I love it because Because giving people that can I foot stop that? Because I think that the thing is that giving people the language to articulate and have that common like speech is so important to get to Britni. I think you were the one that's saying, or somebody, I forgot, around you think you have a certain culture, but you really don't. Because people are not talking about the things that really, really matter to truly define what that is. Oh my gosh, yes, Deborah, go ahead, girl.
Yeah, we all have conversations with CEOs and other C-suite executives often. What percentage of the time do they hit the nail on the head when they're describing their culture? They're describing the dream culture, the vision culture, but it's
or
not the culture. The conversation
that they thought they had like 3 years ago.
Right. When it was a startup, the culture they had, which wouldn't even be an appropriate culture to have at that moment in time, like this moment in time necessarily, and they're still talking about it. Yeah.
So
the conversation needs to be everybody.
And I love that. I think the thing is that, I really do think that CEOs fail depending on how big your organization is when they don't have a strong COO. Because there's an element of understanding culture and having it being the role of filling in those gaps from folks that are focused internally as your CEO is focused externally. So we can talk about that another time. I just want to drop that role, but there's a distinguishing role that when you have the right supporting staff from a C-suite or whatever you want to call it in your leadership team, that is going to help you fill in the gaps because one person shouldn't know all or do all.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're getting to wrap up time. Thank you everybody on the panel, including our extended panel. All of the great insights and questions coming from the viewers. And if you're watching the replay of this, definitely drop in with your questions and comments as well. Let's keep this conversation going. And we have a quick question here. Shannel, at what size should a company have a COO? That's a good question.
Oh, wow.
Put Shannel on the spot.
I know. That's actually a great question. It's less about the amount of employees that you have and more about the types of service and functions you're scaling out to be. So if I was to say 250, fine. I mean, you can do that arbitrary number, but it really does depend on the types of services that your organizations are providing or the diversification of the types of services that your organization provides.
Right.
So, but I can get back to Adeline.
Yeah.
You'll always have someone filling the role, right? Even without the title.
Yes,
I mean,
even
that's
if you're small.
Not always. Yeah. Oh, without the title. Yes.
Without the title or the pay. It's a good deal.
No, probably without the title or the pay, but there's always somebody looking internally and doing that process of like administrating this whole.
And sometimes it's the COO. I mean, I'm sorry, the CEO, which that's the problem. Like don't get me started. Okay.
That's one of the first things to delegate, I would say. So I'm agreeing with Shannel here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sensing a future topic around delegation and the role of the lieutenant in an organization.
Yes.
So you heard it here first. Okay, let's start wrapping this thing up. Final thoughts. Let's go. Who are we going for? Deborah.
I can kick off final thoughts. Okay. Within 2 to 3 months, it's going to feel like everything's falling apart, no matter how great the plan was or how well it was executed. If you drive deep with your culture before, during, in the quiet time, and even after, that will give you some structural integrity to get through the really hard part. So when it feels like everyone's complaining about stuff we already discussed.
Mm-hmm. Shannel.
For me, plan. Without a post-acquisition integration plan, you will fail. You will fail the organization that is being acquired and the organization that is doing the acquiring or the mergers. So always have a post-acquisition integration plan.
Deborah.
Love. Have a language to actually articulate culture before, during, and after so that we can more effectively have these conversations.
And me, you spend so many resources on using hard science and data for every aspect of your acquisition or merger. Use data when you're looking at the culture piece as well, because that is money. So you've got to not just be CEO to CEO having a conversation about the two cultures and how it's going to work. You got to actually do the work to figure out whether it will work and how it's going to work. You can follow all of us right here. Lift up your phone, hover over our QR codes. And of course, that middle QR code, please join the Work Culture Debates page. We come to you with another one of these every month. So join. There's a form or a link to a form right on there, correct? On the LinkedIn page where you can submit ideas for our next discussion, as well as questions beforehand, so that even if you can't be present, you can get those questions into us. And we love the suggestions on further topics. So thank you all so much for tuning in today. And are we ready to go to our outro?
Yes.
There we go.
Goodbye.